If a girl takes testosterone in order to help her win in a sports competition, that is called doping, and it's banned under the regulations of any sports association worth its salt anywhere on this planet. But if she says she's a boy, then doping is suddenly quite kosher. In other news, if you teach regular people how to legally reduce their fiscal burden, you can go to jail in France, because no slave owners likes to have its slaves wisen up. And this works as long as enough gullible fools believe the narrative that stealing 60% or more of the people's income is somehow not theft because the slave owner says so. Speaking of the state stealing as much as possible from the people, it's not just money, it's also privacy and individual choice. The United Kingdom is an expert in that, a place with fewer individual choices available than even most of the third world. Now, add porn to that list as well. You will soon no longer be able to choose to watch porn in the United Kingdom even if you're aged 90. Unless you're willing to risk your entire social life by outing yourself on an inherently insecure network. Progress, comrades, progress. Speaking of progress, if you live in New York, your tax dollars are now paying for offended Muslims because you see the right of the believers in 7th century fascism trumps the right of tens of millions of people to be secure. I am tempted to add something more about the smell in New York, but I won't, because a bunch of researchers concluded that if you're bothered by body odors, then you must be a fascist. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to the 20th episode of Periodic Insanity. Alright, so lots of insanity in the queue and thus I'm recording 2 episodes in the same batch because otherwise my OCD would go nuts if I don't comment on all of the links in my queue. So, first item, coming via Breitbart. Transgender high school wrestler booed after beating girl in state semifinals. Oh boy. A transgender high school wrestler was booed after she beat a female competitor to advance to the state championships on Saturday. The article has the pronouns wrong. So, wrestler Mac Beggs, a ULES Trinity senior from ULES, Texas, was booed after pinning female contestant Kyla Fitz of Cypress Ranch at the UIL state tournament in Cypress, Texas, according to WFAA, an ABC affiliate. Beggs drew criticism last year for joining the female wrestling team when her parents claimed she was beginning the transition from female to male using a testosterone regimen therapy. Opponents sued the school, claiming that the testosterone gave the student an unfair advantage against his female opponents. Despite the lawsuit, the transitioning student went on to win last year's Class 6A Girls Championship in the 110-pound division. Beggs was able to continue wrestling with girls despite the testosterone treatment, in part because in 2016 the state's governing body, the University Interscholastic League, had ruled that students had to compete in the gender class that appears on their birth certificates. The UIL also noted the students' testosterone treatment doesn't fall under banned substances because a doctor prescribed the drug. Last year, Beggs' parents claimed that their so-called son was an inspiration to others. He inspires a lot of people, and if he can help just one person, then it's worth it to Mac, said the student's father, Marco Carrem. Still, other parents at the school say that despite everyone's support for Beggs transitioning, she shouldn't be allowed to compete in a context of strength among other girls. After the teen won her bout Saturday, some boos were heard in the gallery, close quote. Okay, so this is a recurring story. We covered it last year as well. We're talking about a girl who is using banned substances to get an unfair advantage over other girls. If she were to be honest, she would of course be banned under the anti-doping rules. But because she says she is a boy, even though she isn't, she never was, and she will never be, then everyone is supposed to pretend that it's all honky-dory. But it isn't. The proper policy solution here is not to allow her to compete with the boys, but to ban her from competing in the first place. I've seen some idiots pretending not to be leftists who are like, well, why didn't they just allow her to compete with the boys? And the answer, of course, should be self-evident. Because she's not a boy. And the more of this insanity goes on, the worse things will get for honest, hard-working, normal children. That is to say, the rest of the 99.97% of children. For 0.03 minority, everyone else is being systematically discriminated against. That is not something that can be sustained over the long run. This will not end well. And the claim of the father of this obviously disordered girl that his daughter, who pretends to be a boy, is an inspiration to others, can only be true if you consider being an example of never do that as being an inspiration. I mean, seriously, you gotta be pretty far gone into the la-la land to believe that you slowly sterilizing your daughter and doping her to cheat in sports is an inspiration. It's not. It's insanity, mate. Anyway, I've been promising a long and comprehensive video on the topic of the so-called transgender children, and I will do it, and I will explain then where this whole thing is coming from and how and where will it end. I promise you it will be a bombshell, just like the masturbation classes for 3-year-olds video was a couple of years back. But until then, let's move on to some good old classical French socialist insanity. Coming via Le Figaro, suspended prison sentence for instigation to avoid payments to Sécu. Now, there is no perfect equivalent in English for Sécu. Canada has something close to it, but it doesn't have an obvious legal term to it, at least that I'm aware of. Basically, Sécu is the totality of the taxes that socialist governments in Europe don't outright label them as taxes, but rather as social contributions, which in theory they include a tax for the healthcare system, a tax for the Ponzi scheme commonly known as the public pension system, for which your average 40-year-old in France will find out is not eligible for, even though he paid for it. Also a tax for the so-called unemployment insurance, for which the vast majority of those who pay into it find out they're not eligible for it, and a few other smaller fees for things like catastrophe relief, wage guarantee in case of economic crisis, and a few others. These taxes, because they are taxes, make no mistake about it, are usually retained automatically from everyone's wage before you even get to see that money. In the last several years, multiple governments in Europe have tried to extend this scheme of institutionalized theft to include those who had the option to opt out from the notoriously inefficient and wasteful social protection scheme, such as lawyers, independent contractors, sole proprietors, and basically people who live independently and would rather take responsibility for themselves. Alright, so now that you have a broad idea of what Sécu is, let's read. Quote, 4 men and 2 associations were sentenced today by the Paris Criminal Court to suspended prison sentences and fines for insisting on evading the legal obligation to join Sécu. Among the convicted defendants is former dental surgeon Claude Reichmann, whose movement for the freedom from social protection has been campaigning for more than 25 years in this direction. Regarded by the court as the spearhead of the anti-Sécu movement, he was sentenced to 10 months suspended in prison and his association to 60,000 euros fine, half of it suspended, so basically 30,000 euros, for helping individuals to disaffiliate from Sécu. His remarks during public lectures were deemed fallacious by the magistrates through the fact that they make financial gains glowing by the assurance of an alleged impunity, according to a copy of the judgment consulted by Agence France-Presse. The judges squandered his feeling of all power and his willingness to continue these incentives to disaffiliate. A 50-year-old was sentenced to 5 months suspended for providing all means to disaffiliate on his blog. I am leaving Sécu and in a book. Another association, Social Liberty, was sentenced to a fine of 10,000 euros, of which 8,000 suspended, and two of its leaders to 4 and 1 month of suspended imprisonment. All were sentenced for inciting the refusal of taxable persons to comply with the requirements of Social Security legislation, an offense provided for by the Social Security Code. While the defendants argued that European directives have removed the monopoly of Social Security, magistrates recalled that contrary to interpretations and convictions of the defendants, this monopoly remains in France. The court said that they were not prosecuted for an opinion, but for positive acts to persuade as many to violate the legislation in force. The incentive to leave the Social Security is a major attack on the foundation of solidarity and resulted in requests for disaffiliation, added the court. 1,822 to 6 October October the 6th, 2015, according to information provided by the regional funds of the RSI, and correlatively a congestion of the courts of sanitary and social affairs. The disinformation deliberately carried by the defendants has led a large number of contributors to take dangerous steps for themselves and for the finances of the collection agencies, the judges still note. The defendants will have to pay several thousand euros in damages to the National Delegated Fund for the Social Security of the Self-Employed and the Central Agency for the Social Security Agency's civil parties in compensation for their economic damage. In a statement released in January, Reichmann said he was tortured at the Paris court in a rigged trial, close quote. Alright, so first of all, bravo to these fine gentlemen. Now I sure want to meet them, and I'm not joking. Next year I'll do my best to spend a week or two in France. I want to interview these people. Secondly, the court is obviously retarded, but then again it's the rigged court in the notoriously rigged and socialist French Republic. But I repeat myself. Thirdly, these kinds of actions need to be replicated all over Europe. As I said in the video about Norway allowing 7-year-olds to change their gender, the best way to defeat a bureaucracy is to clog it. Think of it as subversion of attrition, if you like, or through an Alinsky perspective, if the rule says every letter gets a response, send them 30,000 letters. Make the enemy live up to his own book of rules, because nobody can live up to his own book of rules. And on the issue of social protection, the entirety of the governments of Europe absolutely are our enemy. Sure, some of them are worse than others. For instance, in Romania there are legal ways to avoid most of this mess. It's just that few people even try. And there has been a court case that settled the issue that the state cannot impose such a monopoly, the way the French court ruled. And the case has been won by an attorney whom I know personally and whom I might even get to interview sometime later this year. But anyway, the insanity portion of this is that the courts have imposed essentially a criminal sanction, even though nobody actually went to jail, over essentially a political opinion and an interpretation of the law, which even according to the judges, it was dangerous, but not exactly wrong. Since only those who spread the information are being persecuted, not those who acted on it, which tells me that these people's interpretation was, after all, correct. It just happened to hurt the state's feelings and pockets, as if anyone should give a shit about that. Now, if I were these people, I would continue to agitate for this by relocating to Belgium, or even better, to Switzerland. What will France do then? Ban their books and blogs? Good luck with that. And especially good luck cramming that measure through the notoriously temperamental French public. No, seriously, good luck with that. Ultimately, the whole social contribution thingy is a total and utter scam, especially the pension plan. The fact of the matter is that all public pension plans in Europe are bankrupt. There is not a single country in Europe, from Russia to Portugal and from Finland to Bulgaria, that can honestly say it can afford its current plan. They are all going to fall like the Ponzi schemes they actually are. The best policy that could be applied right now is to make sure it falls slowly and hurts as fewer people as possible, and in the meantime start a slow liberalization process so that the current working generations, particularly those under the age of 35, will still get some pension in their retirement years. This policy, although by far the best, is also the least popular of a policy because Europe has an economic literacy problem. The vast majority of Europeans, again from Russia to Portugal, from France to Greece and from Romania to Norway, are essentially economically illiterate. As a result, policies that try to patch things up and kick the can down the road are far more popular both with the economically illiterate citizenry and the politicians who thus get to avoid the scandal and pass the issue to basically our grandchildren. Or so they hope, because the issue will not come to be addressed by our grandchildren, but by us. Bankruptcy is coming. By 2030 or 2035, we are going to see at least 4 countries in Europe going bankrupt because of the pension schemes. So under these conditions, the actions of these fine gentlemen to advise their fellow countrymen to avoid getting involved in this mess to begin with is not only liberty-oriented, but by far the most moral thing to do. I mean, seriously, if you knew fiber optics was coming and a friend of yours was being excited to invest in a new copper wire plant, wouldn't you try to do your best to persuade your friend to put his money into something that is not already on its way out? The same is true here. Whether you burn your cash or pay into the state system, it's basically the same thing. You will not see most of that investment back, let alone any profits. So yeah, terrible insanity on the part of the criminal court. Good job by these fine gentlemen, and if any of you can put me into contact with them, please do so, because I want to meet these people. Alright, let's move on. And we'll move on to a developing story which I first reported on back in July 2017 in the video called "The UK's Digital Economy Act is Socialist Garbage." At that time, there were several questions unanswered, so if you haven't seen that video, please do watch it, because I won't rehash all the arguments. So basically, the United Kingdom wants to block internet porn a la Islamic Republic of Iran, only it's not using Sharia arguments, but the European model of attempting to argue for totalitarian garbage, namely the children argument. So there's this article from Wired, far from my favorite website, which was first published back in July and now updated with new information. And by new information, I mean further confirmation that I was right on the money back in 2017 when I said the UK cannot possibly implement this insanity. But let me read you from the article. I'll go straight in the middle of it because most of it is old information dating from July, which I already commented on at the time. So, quote, "How will the United Kingdom porn block and age verification be enforced?" After a large amount of indecision at the start of February 2018, it was confirmed by the British Board of Film Classification would become the regulator for age verification. The body is currently responsible for setting the age restrictions such as PG, 12A, 18, etc. on films broadcast in the United Kingdom. It can make recommendations to cut content or deny a certificate and reject the media's right to circulate in the UK. Censoring the internet is naturally somewhat more complex. If a site is run on funds supplied via massive payment providers such as Visa, those ancillary services could be notified their client is breaking the law and ordered to terminate payments. Internet service providers could also be made to block sites that fail to comply. The BBFC does have the power to fine porn sites that are in breach of law, a sum no greater than £250,000 or 5% of their qualifying turnover. In December 2017, David Austin, the CEO of the BBFC, said the new regime is designed to protect children and vulnerable groups of people from harmful content. The government says the regulator will notify non-compliant pornographic providers and direct ISPs to prevent customers from accessing the websites. What type of content will be blocked? Sex and Censorship's Barnett has been concerned that a great deal of content could be caught in the new regulations net that shouldn't, but the law does attempt to clarify this. It refers to videos or parts of videos that are already assigned an R18 certificate, but goes on to refer to any other material that would be an R18 certificate. The law covers works produced solely or principally for the purposes of sexual arousal. The inclusion of the term principally seems subjective and will require the BBFC to use its judgment, possibly creating its own rulebook of what is and is not safe for work. This is legal content, and creating barriers for adults to access that legal content is in itself damaging to freedom of speech and access to information, Paul Bernal, a lecturer of the UEA Law School and author of Internet Privacy Rights, Rights to Protect Autonomy, said back in 2017. Now, will the porn block work? A lot of uncertainties remain, even close to April 2018 deadline. The BBFC has not publicly stated how it will regulate and enforce the new provisions of the new law. Independent pornographers and privacy campaigners have not been happy with plans for the system. The Open Rights Group's executive director Jim Killock said the BBFC will struggle to ensure that age verification is safe, secure, and anonymous. Largely, the age verification element of the Digital Economy Act has been driven by moral arguments. This is not in itself a bad thing, and there is plenty of ongoing research exploring the impact of online pornography on children and teenagers, but when potentially millions are due to be spent in stuffing up the BBFC and creating new technologies to implement age verification systems, a bit of qualitative and quantitative research would not go amiss. Close quote. Translation. No, the porn block will not work, and none of those tasked to enforce the law really know what they're doing. Which is completely unsurprising, since the vast majority of government bureaucracies in any country on earth are staffed by people who have no idea what they're doing. In fact, the BBFC is formed by people who have no idea whatsoever about how the internet actually works, and many of them don't know anything about any sort of honest research done on porn. The funniest part, well, funny for me because I don't live in Airstrip 1, is the fact that the reasoning for having this policy to begin with relies on stats compiled by the so-called National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which allegedly found that more than half of children and teenagers that access pornography stumbled upon it. Well, as they say, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. The fact of the matter is that there is nobody in Europe that has accurate statistics for the most vulnerable group, namely the under 12 years old. So basically nobody has the answer. Also, the law and the advocates for such insane policies do not and are unwilling to consider any kind of nuance. As I mentioned 2 episodes ago, there is a huge problem with the English-speaking world in particular, and about how it looks at teenage sexuality. And this law just adds even more insanity to that. Because it is, quite frankly, absurd to have the same rules and the same laws for 16-year-olds and for 6-year-olds. 16-year-olds can legally get married and have children of their own. Yet you're telling me that they would be so terribly affected by stumbling upon some porn on the internet? If you believe that, you might want to try to remember what was like when you were 16. And if that fails, trying to get your head checked might also help. I mean, seriously, at one point someone will have to make this argument, even though it is deeply unpopular, because the truth is not established by popularity, neither is logic. Having the same set of laws for 16 or 17-year-olds and considering them as the same to 6-year-olds is biology denialism. 16-year-olds, and sometimes often earlier than that, especially in the United Kingdom, judging by the teen pregnancy rate, these people are usually sexually active already, most of them legally. So telling them that they can't watch porn is nothing short than pure insanity. Ultimately, the only good news is that it won't work. But until everyone figures that one out, there will be tons of breaches of privacy, because the so-called age verification systems are just not secure, and sooner or later, there will be leaks. Also, in one of the versions, the government also wanted to maintain a list, so basically individuals who want a free and open internet would have to require approval from the government and be on the government's list. If such a prospect doesn't frighten you, then congratulations, you are the perfect sheep in the totalitarian superstate that the United Kingdom is building. Madness, I'm telling you. Alright, now let's go to a funnier piece of insanity. Coming from our good old friends from the government. Sorry, The Guardian. Same thing these days. Hate body odor? You're more likely to have right-wing views. Quote, people who have a greater tendency to turn their nose up at the whiff of urine, sweat, and other body odors are more likely to have right-wing authoritarian attitudes, research suggests. The study also found having a greater disgust for body odors was linked, albeit to a smaller degree, with support for Donald Trump when he was a presidential candidate. The team say the findings support the idea that a feeling of disgust might partly underpin social discrimination against others, with the link rooted in a primitive urge to avoid catching diseases from unfamiliar people or environments. We think that authoritarian attitudes might, at least in part, be rooted in biology, says Dr. Jonas Olofsson, the co-author of the research from Stockholm University and the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study. It had to be from Sweden because no other place is that insane. But he stressed feelings of disgust are not immutable. Even though disgust is a very primitive emotion that is definitely rooted in our biological survival, it can still be altered, he said. Previous studies have linked levels of disgust to political orientation, with some research suggesting that those who identify as conservative have greater aversion to revolting images. Olofsson said his team were keen to explore whether the response of individuals towards scenarios linked to scent alone revealed a similar association. We think that olfaction might be at the root of the pathogen detection system, so body odor disgust might be the most primitive, most fundamental way to detect pathogens, he said. Writing in the journal Royal Society Open Science, Olofsson and colleagues report how they explored the issue across 3 experiments involving a total of more than 750 participants recruited online. Participants were presented with questionnaires on a number of topics, including the degree of social, fiscal, and moral liberalism and their level of disgust towards pathogens, assessed by asking participants to rate on a 7-point scale their response to phrases such as sitting next to someone who has red sores on their arm. They were also asked to rate on a scale how disgusting they were by a collection of statements linked to body odors, such as you are sitting next to a friend and notice that your feet smell strongly, and how emphatically they agreed with 15 statements linked to right-wing authoritarianism, such as our country needs a more powerful leader in order to destroy the radical and immoral currents prevailing in society today. Now hold on a second. Seriously. Our country needs a powerful leader in order to destroy the radical and immoral currents prevailing in society today. That's not specifically right-wing authoritarianism. It's just not. The Feminist Initiative Party in Sweden also believes that, and it's a communist party. So this is basically garbage research made by garbage Swedish academics, if you pardon my stream of pleonasms, and no offense to garbage is intended. I mean, seriously, these people can't even properly assess what right-wing authoritarianism even is. And if they fail at that fundamental level, why should anyone care about the rest of what they say? Or indeed, anything they say from this point on. Quote, in addition, the studies show that levels of body odor disgust showed a stronger link to authoritarianism than levels of disgust at the possibility of catching a bug. However, while body odor disgust was linked to right-wing authoritarianism, it was not linked to other measures of political conservatism, although the authors note that could be down to the nature of the questions. Our results show that about 10% of authoritarianism, i.e. how people vary in this regard, could be explained by their body odor disgust sensitivity, explained Olofsson. About 2% of Trump support could be explained by how disgusted people are by the thought of body odors, he said. The findings, Olofsson noted, mean that it is not possible to accurately assess a person's authoritarianism or their political preference based on their responses to body odor. The effects are subtle, he said. Roger Guinness-Sorolla, professor of social psychology at the University of Kent, who was not involved in the study, said the research tied in with previous studies suggesting people who are sensitive to physical disgust are also more intolerant of lower status social groups. And people say I am the extremist when I say that if the entirety of social psychologists were to disappear tomorrow, literally nobody would notice. Anyway, the focus on body odor discussed, he added, was interesting. This supports a more directly social origin for this kind of prejudice. As Orwell wrote in The Road to Wigan Pier, that is what we were taught. The lower classes smell, he said. This adds to the evolutionary account that prejudice makes use of disgust because people outside one's group carry unfamiliar diseases. Close quote. Can you imagine? These people are being paid to put out this kind of drivel. Man, I'm telling you, I'm in the wrong business. In the current year, particularly in Sweden, it's very profitable to peddle this kind of nonsense. Much more profitable than discussing economic data about immigration or crime statistics or the degree of incompatibility between a certain religion of pieces and Sweden. All of these are difficult topics which necessarily lead to politically incorrect conclusions. Meanwhile, discussing essentially that showers and cleanliness are a far-right construct, that's popular and profitable. Yet I am deemed the extremist when I say that the academia needs to be abandoned and torpedoed. In my eyes, if someone is a university professor in a non-technical field, I automatically assume that he is dumber than a 5-year-old. Because in the vast majority of time, this is indeed correct. I mean, look at this. This isn't science. This isn't even advocacy or activist science, or even social science, the way normal people used to understand it. This is pure garbage. The Swedish taxpayer is being defrauded by having to pay this schmuck even 1 krona. Terrible. Alright, let's go to the next one. Merkel comes out as a Nazi. Well, no, that's not the headline. The headline from the Washington Post is Merkel says Germany has no-go areas, government won't say where. German officials have been left speechless by Chancellor Angela Merkel's comment that there are no-go areas in the country. The notion there are places in Germany outsiders, including police, can't visit, has previously been dismissed by officials. In an interview Monday with German broadcaster NTV, Merkel says she favors a zero-tolerance policy on crime, and that includes preventing no-go areas. That's areas where nobody dares to go. She added, there are such areas and one has to call them by their name and do something about them. Asked to name the areas, Merkel's spokesman Steffen Seibert told reporters Wednesday the Chancellor's words speak for themselves. Interior Ministry spokesman Johannes Dimroth likewise declined to identify no-go areas, saying security was a matter for local, not federal authorities. Close quote. Now, do you remember when you all screamed that we're engaging in conspiracy theories when we spoke about no-go zones? Because I remember in 2015 I made a video about that and I was dismissed as a conspiracist. Heck, I remember back in May 2017, a month before I went to Sweden, how a useless piece of academic shit, but I repeat myself, seriously argued against me that no-go zones in Sweden are a figment of the far-right imagination. His words, not mine. The same academic piece of shit became invisible when I published my first videos from those said zones, and later on simply stated that he is no longer comfortable discussing the matter with anyone either from the left or from the right. Same for Germany. I'm looking forward to get down to Bucharest and take a printed copy of this article to a few of the geniuses down there who smeared me and people like me for our truthful reporting about what is actually going on in Germany rather than what the ARD and the Deutsche Welle are reporting about Germany. Anyway, I'm not particularly optimistic. I mean, let's not forget that this piece of commie-era refuse has also proclaimed that multiculturalism has failed, right before flooding Germany and most of Europe with even more multicultural diversity that is currently enriching Germany to the point that even some far-left feminists have started to consider the so-called far-right arguments, which are not really far-right at all, since most of what I say about borders was standard social democratic policy just 20 years ago. Anyway, speaking of cultural enrichment, NYC must pay 180 grand to 3 Muslim women forced to remove hijabs for mugshots. New York City will have to pay $180,000 to 3 Muslim women after forcing them to take off their hijabs for mugshots. 3 lawsuits were settled Monday in Brooklyn federal court stemming from the NYPD policy of photographing people wearing religious head coverings, the New York Daily News reported. The 3 women settled for $60,000 each. Some cases date to 2012 when a high school girl, identified as GE, was arrested after a brawl with 2 other girls whom she thought spread gossip about her. GE was initially brought to the local police station and was told to take off her hijab. GE refused and was taken to a secluded room with a female police officer, took her photo outside the presence of any man, the Daily News reported. But at the Brooklyn Central booking, the police could not accommodate the girl's religious needs, telling her that there are not any female officers available and that the camera is in a fixed spot, thus the mugshot could not be taken in a private room. The girl alleged that the male officer then took her photo without a hijab, making her feel exposed, violated, and distraught, as she was forced to be without the Islamic garb for 20 minutes while male officers and prisoners looked at her. Oh, can you imagine how terrible? Police issued an order in March 2015, according to court filings, changing the policies regarding people who refuse to take off their religious head coverings. Officers who perform the arrest had to tell the person that the NYPD officer offers a choice of getting a private photo without the head garb and with an officer of the same gender. 2 other cases were filed in 2015 and 2016 by GA's lawyers, Tahani Abushi, and involved a similar situation. One woman claims to have been forced to remove her veil at Brooklyn Center booking police station and was denied a female photographer. Another accuser said her hijab was removed at the scene of her arrest. Abushi told the Daily News on Tuesday that the police department issued additional policies regarding religious headwear in December 2017. We did our best to establish good precedent, Abushi said. On the other hand, it gives officers guidance, and on the other hand, it protects the exercise of religious freedom, close quote. Now, this whole thing is just pure madness. No, there should not be any guidance on this. You either take your damn hijab off or it's 7 days in jail for contempt, 21 days for the second offense, and then escalate it up from there. Why should this 7th century cult be accommodated in a civilized society, especially when it comes to criminals who belong to this cult? Because we're talking here about women who've been arrested. Now, do you have any idea how bad things have to be in order for a cucked police officer to actually arrest a woman? Because again, this is the NYPD, the police force that would rather imprison innocent men or even facilitate the murder of innocent men before even considering the touching of a woman, let alone arresting her, let alone a quote-unquote minority woman. So already the fact that they've been arrested is a testament of how disruptive they were. But then to also have to accommodate their 7th century cult? Why? And no, I'm sorry, but I extend exactly zero sympathy for the terrible oppression of having to breathe air without a hijab for the whole 20 minutes, boo-fucking-who. Maybe try not committing crimes and not get yourself arrested next time. I heard it helps a lot in avoiding these kinds of situations. But then again, this is the New York City, the place that would ruin your life for using the wrong pronouns, so I'm not terribly surprised that they're also pandering to a totalitarian command and control primitive cult. I mean, why not? Once you pander to one cult, you have to pander to all of them. Well, all of them except Christianity in the case of white men. That can safely be ignored. But everything else needs to be pandered to. Welcome to progress. Pure madness. Alright, one more, also from gynocentric stupidity, or how governments pander to the most retarded demands if those demands come from women. In India, free boob jobs for poor women to boost their confidence, titles the New York Post. Thousands of women in India's Tamil Nadu state have been offered free boob jobs because poor people also have a right to look beautiful. The impoverished southern Indian state will now offer cosmetic breast surgery free of cost to all women, with priority given to the poorest. The state has previously provided thousands of disadvantaged people with goats, laptops, and bicycles, among other items. Dr. C. Via Bhaskar, whatever, quote, "If a poor woman desires to look beautiful, we will support her financially. Whether they require medical procedures or beauty treatment, it will be free." Tamil Nadu is ranked among the top states in India's public healthcare system, compared with ailing government-run facilities in many other parts of the vast country. But critics of the new scheme said the state government is wasting public money on cosmetic surgery instead of spending money on treating serious ailments. "It's sad that we're now focusing on beauty instead of life-saving surgeries," Dr. S. Elango, a former public health official in Tamil Nadu, told the Times of India newspaper. Cosmetic breast surgery is becoming increasingly popular in India, but private hospitals can charge $3,799 for a procedure. More than 90,000 such procedures were carried out in the country in 2016, according to the International Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery, up from 50,600 in 2010. The Tamil Nadu scheme was launched at a state-run clinic in state capital Chennai, with the promise to soon expand it to other districts of the state. Close quote. Now, isn't that great? Now, here's some numbers. Tamil Nadu has a 20% illiteracy rate, with 25 to 27% among women. Translation: 1 in 4 women can't even write their own fucking name. But they have a they have a right to a free boob job. Oh, isn't that great? Life expectancy at birth in Tamil Nadu is at 70, slightly higher for women, but still significantly lower than China, Armenia, or Russia. But hey, they might die earlier, but they'll die having great boobs. Yeah, sure, life expectancy for women in Tamil Nadu is slightly higher than Pakistan, but Pakistan is a shithole, whereas India wants to be taken a lot more seriously. And I am willing to take India seriously, but when shit like this comes out, it kind of makes things a little bit difficult. You know what I'm saying? I could go on like this quite a lot with the statistics. For instance, Tamil Nadu has a maternal death rate at about 73 per 100,000. Sure, it's better than Pakistan, but far worse than China's. About 3 times worse than China's. But hey, women in China don't get free boob jobs. So there's that. The point here is that instead of spending the resources to tackle things that can be tackled, this particular Indian state prefers to squander it on essentially women's vanity. Now that is a recipe for disaster. Alright, I think that's enough insanity for one episode. I will stop here because I will go nuts myself if I read more of these things. So, with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. Please do subscribe to my social media, and I'll see you all very soon on Freedom Alternative.